and welcome to Hoffman's Hot Seat. I'm Tom Hoffman with One-to-One Media. Joining me today is Dan McDade, President and CEO of PointClear. Today we'll be discussing best practices in generating sales leads. Dan, thanks for joining us.
Tom, great to be with you here today.
Dan, what are the keys to generating sales leads?
Tom, there are really three things that we look at as important in generating leads, and we refer to that internally as M2O, which stands for market, media, and offer. The market piece of that is really market focus and segmentation. A lot of times we'll talk to prospects and say, what's your market? And they'll say the Fortune 1000. Now, the Fortune 1000 really explodes out to 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 or more companies. Some of them are independent revenue reporting, independent decision-making companies that all are targets. So typically, a target market is not the Fortune 1000, but something much more specific than that. So we recommend starting with market focus and segmentation and focusing your efforts on the broadest applicable market, but not outside of the applicable market where you're wasting money. The second is the media mix, and we like to recommend what we refer to as a multi-touch, multimedia, and multi-cycle process that multiplies results. So it's not all about the use of one single media, for example, sending out postcards, or one single media sending out emails, or even one single media making a bunch of telephone calls or calling on offices, door to door on every floor, like the old telecom days. We're talking about mixing the media so that you can build credibility, build a story, have one media build on the other, so that let's say, for example, if it's prospecting and generating sales leads, then it would be a combination of telephone calls, voicemails, emails, in some cases direct mail, that build on each other and ultimately build interest, whereas an example in our situation for our clients, 10 to 30% of the opportunities we generate come as the result of a callback or a reply to an email. And then finally, this sounds kind of old-fashioned, but it's focusing on the benefits instead of the features. And we talk about that there are three conditions of need. The first condition of need is the fear of loss in your current situation, which is a very strong motivator. The second is the perceived risk of deterioration in your current situation. And the third is the opportunity to improve your situation, which is what I refer to as selling to the rainbow. And to the extent that your benefits are selling to the rainbow as opposed to a fear of loss or perceived risk of deterioration in your current situation, then your offer is probably not strong enough to impact the market. I like to just tell a quick story. I say, picture yourself asleep in bed at 2 o'clock in the morning and the phone rings, and it's your next door neighbor. You recognize his voice, and he says, "Hey, Tom, there's somebody in their driveway, and they're trying to give you a tire." You're going to think, what the heck are you talking about? This is a crank call. You hang up the phone and go to sleep. Now, conversely, let's say the same thing happens. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. It's cold outside. It's raining, and your next door neighbor calls and they say, "Hey, Tom, there's somebody in your driveway, and they're trying to steal your tire." Well, now that's a fear of loss motivation that's much stronger than the opportunity to improve of somebody at 2 o'clock in the morning giving you a tire. And as ridiculous as that example is, it's a great example for folks to take a look at the offer components and make sure that it's on track. So as far as generating sales, focus on the market, focus on market and segmentation, use multi-touch, multimedia, and multi-cycle processes to multiply results, and make sure that you are matching your offer and the benefits of that offer to the condition of need of the prospect.
So are there secrets to success in generating sales leads that business leaders often aren't aware of?
There are, and I think probably the biggest secret to success is that what C-level executives think is happening isn't really happening. The gap between marketing and sales is so wide, there's just a tremendous amount of wasted investment in most companies. And a lot of that has to do with not really having the right addressable market, not agreeing on what the definition of a lead is, not agreeing on what the offer is, kind of going back to the first question. But the bottom line is, as a matter of fact, I have a book coming out called The Truth About Leads that talks to C-level executives about this specific issue, which is to not see what they want to see, but actually see what's there. And if they're seeing what's there, the chances are they're going to be shocked at what's happening.
So what are some steps that can be taken to better align sales and marketing for more effective lead generation?
There's 3 or 4 things, and I want to give you just another quick story. We worked with a company some years ago. This was back, more in the kind of the go-go days of the dot-com era, but it's very applicable and kind of typical. That company had $100 million, and in fact, they had so much money that they spent $250,000 one time just on a logo and a color palette. but they were competing with a company that had a $10 billion market cap at the time, and it was very successfully selling point solutions to a broad spectrum of customers, and their solutions went anywhere from, say, $10,000 to $25,000, with a big deal for them probably in the $50,000 to $100,000 range. And our client had a marketing department that was marketing point solutions, very similar to their largest competitor, but they had a sales team that was built of elephant hunters, and I'm still very good friends with the VP of sales, but he built a team of elephant hunters that was only interested in enterprise-sized deals. So they were out looking for $1 million opportunities. The marketing is throwing over the fence point solutions and $10,000 to $25,000 deals. The enterprise sales team, the elephant hunters, are only looking for $1 million deals. And as a result, the company went through the $100 million, or most of it, before they were absorbed into the company that had $10 billion market cap ultimately, and really lost a tremendous opportunity because they actually had a far superior product. It was actually a really cool solution, and so it was just really a shame to see that happening. And what the management team could have done and should have done is the following. One is to agree on who they were targeting. There's very, very few companies. As a matter of fact, I once told the VP of sales he had more salespeople than there were $1 million deals in the country at that time for that solution. So if you want to go after $1 million deals, then you have to identify the companies that are capable of spending $1 million and prospect effectively with them. And the chances are you could probably get by with fewer expensive salespeople to do that because there just aren't that many of them. But if you're going to be prospecting for smaller point solution type deals, then you want to make sure that you've identified the best market for that and make sure that you have the right salespeople in place to sell that. $1 million plus deal salespeople, elephant hunters, are not interested in closing $10,000 to $25,000 deals, so that was just a mismatch from a market standpoint. The second thing is to make sure that the offer has been created in such a way that everybody knows what you're selling. I won't say more about that, but probably I've already said enough. And then the third and most important thing is for everybody to agree on the definition of an opportunity. I see that in so many companies right now. The statistics are that something in the order of 95% of leads are not followed up for various reasons. And so that means that just 1 out of 20 or fewer leads are actually being followed up by field sales. There's good reason for that. They've followed up on leads in the past that really haven't been high quality. They haven't gotten a lot of return for their investment, so they just basically give up. But making sure that everybody is on the same page, and you, I'm sure, Tom, and I read every day about how important it is to agree on the definition of a lead, but very few companies are doing that effectively. And then finally, you want to make sure that the metrics through the process are agreed upon metrics. And I'll give you some examples. Companies can call these whatever they want, but here's an example that I think works for companies, and that is that you start out by identifying the definition of a marketing qualified lead. Marketing qualified leads then have to be accepted by sales. A portion of those accepted leads become qualified by sales and ultimately enter the forecast, and then a certain percentage of those actually close. One of the biggest problems today, and it's really a psychological issue that has to do with the pressure that's put on a salesperson and even how they're built from an ego standpoint. So if you give the salesperson a stack of leads and you say, work through these, tell me which ones you think look good and the ones you're going to work, well, you get very, very little feedback from that, because what happens is the sales rep knows they're going to close a small fraction of any group of leads they're given. Why would they want to take ownership and responsibility for 5 or 10 leads, knowing that they're going to close one deal and have a 10 to 20% close rate? Well, a 10 to 20% close rate might be fantastic. As a matter of fact, industry average in technology is about 22.2% of sales qualified leads actually closing. But if you give the sales rep a choice as to whether or not to accept a lead, they're not going to accept the lead until they're pretty darn sure it's going to close, which doesn't provide visibility into the sales process at all. So that's probably the biggest thing that I think that companies can do, or the four biggest things is, number one, make sure that they're market focused. Number two, make sure that the offer is consistent with what the market is looking for. Make sure that there's a definition of a lead, and then make sure that the metrics are tracked all the way through the process from beginning to end.
Okay, terrific. Well, Dan, this is great advice, and thanks again for taking some time to share your recommendations with us.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it, Tom.